Welcome to Defiance Daily. I am your host, Miles Taylor. A bombshell viral video dropped on social media last night from the most unlikely place, the Federal Reserve. Fed Chair Jerome Powell released a video last night. Like I said, a bombshell video. And we will talk about why what he said could spell disaster for Americans. But there are some points of light. We will talk about those too, because the Fed chair says he's under criminal investigation, but that's not the end of the story. And then Donald Trump's tariff policy, his effort to slap taxes on foreign goods, which is making everything pricier for Americans, sits on a knife's edge. The Supreme Court could rule as soon as Wednesday on whether that policy is legal. And one person close to the administration is betting against the president. We will tell you who. And finally, chaos continues in Minnesota. After a weekend of nationwide protests, the Trump administration is sending hundreds more shock troops, formerly known as ICE, into the state rather than turning down the temperature. But Minnesota is not taking all of this sitting down. We will talk about that. We will talk about what it means for the state and for the nation. And today we will have former Republican governor of Montana, Marc Racicot, with us to break it all down. This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the defiant. We start today, folks, with Jerome Powell. Now, I want you to watch the full video of what Powell said last night, because this came as a huge shock. A lot of you were winding down your weekend on a Sunday night when the most important and understated economic figure in America came out and said something breathtaking. Here it is.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. I have served at the Federal Reserve under 4 administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike. In every case, I have carried out my duties without political fear or favor, focused solely on our mandate of price stability and maximum employment. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people. Thank you.
All right, let's talk for a second, folks, about why this matters. Because if you're not a big watcher of the Federal Reserve, you may see this. You may see Jerome Powell, who's as vanilla and old school as they get, and think, well, this is another Donald Trump revenge action. Why could it matter? Well, I'll tell you this. Of all of the revenge investigations launched by the Trump administration, this one could potentially be the most significant. There is a reason that the Federal Reserve has independence from the president. The Federal Reserve controls your interest rates. The Federal Reserve you can think of as the institution that sort of decides whether the United States prints more money or doesn't print more money. Let me give you an analogy. If the president of the United States has control over the Federal Reserve, think about that as him having control over the thermostat in your house. Now, a president cares about how everyone feels in the short term. So if it's cold in the house, he's going to crank up the temperature to make it feel warm and make everyone feel happy. That's the short term. But in the long term, he doesn't care if the house burns down or the pipes burst. And this is what happens economically when presidents throughout the world, throughout history, when tin pot dictators have taken over countries, take over their central bank. What happens is they turn up the temperature. They make money flow freely. What does that mean? Well, that means in the short run, people feel good. They have more money. Money's flowing. They can get loans for cheaper. In the medium to long term, what this does is it drives up prices. It makes the value of your savings account tank, and it wrecks entire economies. This story has happened again and again and again. And it's why Wall Street got so nervous last year when Donald Trump talked about replacing the Fed chair, because you don't want economic policy set by the momentary whims of a president. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more today with our guest and with my co-founder, Xander Schultz. But I'm going to take you back in time to last summer, because this fight with Jerome Powell did not start with these threats of a criminal prosecution that apparently the Federal Reserve started to receive this weekend. A lot of people think it started last July when Donald Trump attempted to call out Jerome Powell on the renovations of the Federal Reserve Board building, hoping to paint Powell as some sort of fat cat, only to be embarrassed on air.
Yeah. So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no,
including the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So we're going to take.
Love the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme at the end of that. But look, Donald Trump does not forget an embarrassment. He tried to call out the Fed chair. The Fed chair had the facts. Donald Trump has clearly not forgotten that. Now, before we get to Donald Trump's response, let's talk about the stock market response, because there was a yo-yo reaction today in U.S. markets, which opened lower this morning after reports in the wake of this probe announcement, raising concerns about political pressure on the Federal Reserve. The Dow fell about 300 points shortly after the opening bell as investors reacted. By the close of the market today, stocks had recovered and the S&P 500 hit a record high, signaling markets expect Trump's pressure campaign to fail. However, there were signs of lingering concern as the dollar fell. Treasury yields rose and gold and silver surged to record highs, signaling that Wall Street may be bracing for further volatility, or as some people put it, bet against America. Now, Republican senators are creating distance between the Trump administration and themselves over this decision. Senator Lisa Murkowski called for a congressional investigation into DOJ over the probe, calling it coercive. Republican Senator Tom Tillis vowed to block Fed nominees until all of this ends. And other Republicans, including House Financial Services Chair French Hill, defended Jerome Powell's integrity and warned the probe is an unnecessary distraction, to say nothing of Donald Trump's own Treasury Secretary, who is reportedly pissed off about this decision because it could cause chaos in the markets. When asked how important it is to the American people that the Fed chair be able to act independently of the president, CNN's Harry Enton let the numbers do the talking. Take a look.
They think it's incredibly important that the Fed acts independently of Donald Trump, and they think it's best for the economy. We're talking about more than 2/3 of adults, 68%, 91% of Democrats, 75% of independents, and even 41%, 2/5 of Trump's base thinks it's important that the Fed acts independently of Trump for the best of the economy. So when you get 41% of Republicans and 91% of Democrats agreeing on something with 75% of independents, you know it is a popular position. The bottom line is the American people vigorously disagree with the President of the United States on this. They want a Fed that acts independently of him because they think it's best for the economy.
Now, in a brief interview with NBC News Sunday night, Donald Trump said, quote, "I don't know anything about it, but he's certainly," referencing Jerome Powell, "not very good at the Fed, and he's not very good at building buildings." Now, if this is anything like Donald Trump's other revenge investigations, surely he knows more than he's letting on. But I'm going to tell you why I'm optimistic about this. Because I said to you at the beginning, this is not all doom and gloom, that Donald Trump appears to be poised to try to create the justification to take over the Federal Reserve and set monetary policy and potentially drastically reduce the value of your savings account. And my optimism comes from a few corners. One, as I mentioned moments ago, the Republican Party is pushing back against this because elected Republican leaders understand economics. They understand how scary this is for the President of the United States to try to mount a takeover of the Federal Reserve and to do it in such a ham-fisted way. But also, Donald Trump has been on a losing streak with his revenge campaigns. Whether it's Letitia James or James Comey, the ham-fisted approach that I mentioned to these revenge campaigns has resulted in Donald Trump repeatedly having setbacks in court. But neither of those are the primary reason I'm optimistic about what's happening here. I'm optimistic because of what Jerome Powell did last night. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, got ahead of the White House. Jerome Powell did not let Donald Trump set the stage here. He didn't let the administration announce criminal charges against the Fed to try to turn the tide of public opinion against the Federal Reserve Board chair. No, he came out and he struck first. Why does that make me optimistic? Because I will tell you this, a year ago, that would not have happened. A year ago, as CEOs were being threatened and law firms were being threatened and individual officials, current and former officials, were being threatened, as the administration, the incoming administration, was preparing to fire scores, thousands of federal workers, people went silent. People did not push back. But Jerome Powell, one of the least likely figures of the resistance, of the defiance, put out this video last night ahead of the White House to fight back in advance of this clearly partisan, clearly revenge-focused action. That should give us all a note of optimism because it shows that the defiance is picking up momentum. Now, I want to bring in my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, to talk about this. And Xander, I will say, as you pop onto the screen here, I really urge people to follow what we are doing here at Defiance.org. If they're not, please like, please share, please subscribe to our social media accounts. Please join the Club for Courageous Americans, because we are going to be very active in pushing back against revenge campaigns like this. In fact, already the Defiance.org Club has funded lawsuits in retaliation to the Trump administration's unconstitutional actions and to defend officials who were on the receiving end of those partisan investigations from DOJ. So if you want to help that, if you want to help push back against this, come join us in the effort. Xander, what do you make of all this? Because again, it would be easy to just see doom and gloom of Donald Trump trying to literally take over our pocketbooks. But I was so heartened last night when I saw this video.
It reminds me, I think our very first episode of Defiance, we talked about premature capitulation and the willingness to fight. You see the after effects of James Comey and Letitia James fighting and winning. You see that with each successive case, the belief that Trump targeting you is going to end up, in some sort of meaningful prosecution of you and whatnot, is decreasing the bravery you need to make a speech like Jerome Powell made, is lowering in some ways. Not saying what he did isn't brave, but it is getting easier and easier to stand up to these folks because we see the system holding and we know this is a bunch of hot air most of the time. And so it's nice to see Jerome Powell out there. Miles, I wonder how this is landing for you as you watch James Comey and Letitia James, as someone who's targeted. Like, you're watching this in real time. You know you're on the line. A lot of us are scared because we think one day we'll be on the line. You're currently on the line. What is this doing for your morale?
I mean, look, that's why I was fist pumping the air last night. I mean, my first response in seeing the video was to go to Hannah, my wife, and say, oh my gosh, they're trying to target the Fed chair with a criminal investigation. Then I watched the actual video, and my thought was, wow, they're not taking this laying down. They're not even waiting for the White House to do something else. The moment they got a whiff of this, they're taking all the air out of it and saying, this is ridiculous. This is clearly an investigation meant to coerce the Fed chair, looking into absurdities about his congressional testimony related to the budget of the building. It's not like Jerome Powell is stealing from the taxpayers to make himself bigger buildings. In fact, the deep irony of all of this is, as the administration is apparently launching an inquiry into the renovations of the Federal Reserve Board building, Donald Trump did not ask anyone's permission and knocked down the east wing of the White House and is building a $400 million ballroom. I mean, good luck making that work either in a literal court or the court of public opinion. And so I was really heartened to see Powell fighting back. And I also think, to your point, Xander, this sends a message to other people who might be targeted. I mean, my family decided to fight back, but in that period in April, it was very unclear if folks were going to start standing up or not. It was very scary. And the administration had the wind at their backs. They were taking the Justice Department and sending it after people. But now, folks like Jerome Powell pushing back are a message to the next member of Congress, the next senator, the next CEO, the next NGO leader, the next protest leader who's on the receiving end of a subpoena or a threat or a knock on the door from the FBI. No, this administration doesn't have all-powerful ability to persecute you. In fact, you have the law on your side. Go stand up for yourself. That was a really, really great thing to see.
Yeah, only if you bend the knee prematurely. That's the only time they have that power. And so it's nice to see the winning streak the good guys are on right now. And I hope Jerome Powell adds to that streak.
Well, there's someone I want to bring into this conversation who has been watching all of these things happen within the Republican Party. Former Montana Governor Marc Racicot. Governor, great to have you here. You are a two-term governor in a Republican state. You've continued to be a reform leader within the GOP and within the conservative movement, as Donald Trump has hijacked the party and steered it towards this strange brand of hyper-populism. I'm curious to get your reaction to this, because in the immediate, when the Jerome Powell thing happened, even though I was excited he was pushing back, my thought is always, do the American people understand even what the Fed is and how this is significant? Although that CNN piece you probably saw shows that at least a lot of Americans have an opinion on the Fed. I want to get your take on the whole thing.
Well, I don't know that I can add more than you've already put before the public, but the fact of the matter is how you have described it is reflective, frankly, if you think about it, the way that Donald Trump does everything. He immediately, it was like this even when he was in private business. If he wanted to move forward with a project, he simply went and tore it down. And then there was nothing to be done but to reconstruct it. And that is precisely how the administration has been proceeding from the very first moment, from the very beginning. Look, there's no ethic, no character value, no institutional restraint, no deference that is paid by Donald Trump to anything that is not within his whim and caprice to alter or make or remanufacture in his own image in a way that he wants. And at the end of the day, I think the screw is turning across the United States of America, even with business now, that this has been an opportunity, seeing Powell get out in front of this particular issue and articulate precisely, very factually, very thoughtfully, judiciously, I would say, what this is all about. So I think you're right that, in fact, him getting out early and setting the stage, setting the conditions for what is going to be discussed and why, has communicated a very, very strong message across the country. And when you add that to what has been taking place in so many different areas, the extortion, the export of human beings out of the country, the vengeance, the anger, the bitterness, the failure to live up to the Constitution, to invade countries contrary to the United Nations Charter, in addition to the UCMJ attaching penalties to those who may be involved, up all the way to potentially homicide charges with these murders that have been taking place in the high seas of the world. So I think really what you're describing, Miles, is that the screw is turning with more constituencies across the country. You know, I've been sitting back wondering, when was it that the titans of industry would get involved in this particular debate? Surely
Mm-hmm.
they cannot be missing it in any regard. They know what's taking place. They know what their duty is, and they have deferred all of these great leaders of business and finance across the country. So I think this is going to be a precipitating moment for the people from those particular sectors. And I think they're critically important to these debates. And as a matter of responsibility, civic responsibility, obedience to the Constitution, and concern, genuine concern for the welfare of America and Americans across the country, um, it's changing, and we have to keep it going. The momentum has to continue to build. You can pretty much depend upon every day, it seems to me, another outrage from Donald Trump. And as a consequence of that, it's a target-rich environment for people who are trying to find out what's right to be done, trying to do it at the right time for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Governor, one of the things that really concerns me is not just the obvious corruption and politically motivated targeting that's happening here, but the impact if Trump eventually does gain the wheels of the Federal Reserve and is deciding interest rates based on, you know, his personal whims, and to Miles' point, trying to drive short-term gains. We saw this happen in Turkey. There was 86% inflation, I think, after Erdogan did something similar. But inflation is so hard to attribute to the right folks. Like it's why it's a dangerous tool, because people will attribute the lower interest rates to Trump, and they'll have time to spin the story on inflation. I just want to get your reactions to the particular threat around this type of corruption.
Well, if it hadn't happened in so many other spheres, if there weren't so many lies and opportunities for deception, and if the people of America, I think, have been paying more and more attention over time. You know, there were 3 leverage points that have expired so far, 2 essentially that have expired. The first one was impeachment, and you couldn't find enough members of Congress with enough courage to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time. Then you moved on to the qualification of Trump as a candidate after he had been found guilty of insurrection. And of course, the Senate didn't have the boldness, the audacity, the conscience to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. Then we moved on to that, away from that disqualification litigation, which really, honestly, on its face and clearly should have disallowed his ability to even file for office. And now we're focused on the 26th election. And with that, what has happened over the course of time is that there's a massive number of people out there, in my judgment, good and decent people, our friends, our neighbors, our fellow citizens, who tend to adhere to their own business, not to be overly boisterous or full of yelling and screaming, but they've been listening, apparently, because you can see the polls changing, you can see the issues changing, and I think we're just about to the point to where we see Donald Trump spinning out of control, and they're starting to realize that this is not normal in any of our past history. And as a consequence of all of these things in all of these venues, the tearing of the White House down is probably one of the most graphic examples of how the people of America have focused upon those things that they're genuinely concerned about, but now are talking about. More and more civil discussion in large groups, large numbers of people, 7.5 million. Not all that long ago, there are now protests all across the country, focused upon the immigration tactics that we've been experiencing. So finally, I think the level of decency that Americans more collectively believe has to be brought in to make a functioning democracy is starting to energize them and activate them. So I have some great hope now if you think about it, it was only the people that set us on this course 237 years ago with Shays' Rebellion and with the Boston Tea Party and the Declaration of Independence, now almost 250 years old. It was the people that ultimately rose up and did something about it. They didn't want to go back to the law of Trump lives by, is the law of the jungle. Those who are strong get rewarded. Those who are weak get ignored and dismissed. And if you add color into those identifiers, then you have something that's incredibly insidious. And so I think the level of decency has been coursing through the veins of 65, 70% of the people over time. And now it's starting to manifest itself, and we cannot let up.
Well, Governor, I also want to ask you about whether this is going to be a wake up call, not just for Wall Street, but sort of business conservatives around the country who voted for Donald Trump because they said things to you and me and Xander and people listening like, oh, look, I don't like Biden and I don't like Kamala Harris and I don't love Donald Trump, but I just want economic stability. And it was foreseeable that Donald Trump was not going to bring economic stability, but a lot of them had this false notion that it would. And I'll tell you, Xander probably remembers this dinner. We won't say who was there, but I mean, he and I remember a couple of months before the election, we were in New York City and we had a steak dinner with Wall Street executives and billionaires. And they asked me this question at the end of the table of whether I thought Donald Trump would bring economic stability. And I said very plainly to them, if Donald Trump returns to office, he's going to slap tariffs on goods all around the country. It's going to be taxes, and that's going to be disastrous to the marketplace and to people's pocketbooks. He's going to insert himself like a socialist dictator in private industry, tell companies what to do and take over American companies. And then lastly, my biggest warning to them was about the Fed. I said, look, Donald Trump wants to take over the Federal Reserve. And you could see their eyes widen on that because they knew what that meant. I mean, look, my pocketbook is not very thick, right? But I know that if Donald Trump takes over the Fed, his ability to go on a spending binge and to print money is in the short term going to make me feel richer. But in the medium term, it's going to kill the value of my home. It's going to kill the value of my savings account. It will make me poor. And you could see those business leaders who have a lot more to lose than me wide-eyed at this statement. But here's the thing, Governor, they didn't believe it because people believe what they want to believe. And they didn't believe Donald Trump would take over the Fed. And they felt like, well, people around him will stop that from happening. Well, look, his Republican Treasury Secretary didn't stop this move against Jerome Powell, which seems to be an effort to take over the Fed. Republicans in Congress didn't stop him. There's almost no one to stop him. In fact, the only man who seems able to fight back against this is Jerome Powell himself. I mean, we are potentially one person away from Donald Trump getting a Darth Vader-like chokehold around the American economy. I want to know, do you think that's enough to wake up Wall Street, to wake up business-friendly conservatives around the country?
Well, I think with the evolving process that we've been watching, and with now the attention of the American people that have been focused upon these issues, and with the pain, Miles, when you take a look at our history, we've had some very, very difficult moments in the history of this country. The Civil War might be the most graphic example. And out of that pain came the resolve to do something about making certain that, in fact, we focus upon the true characteristics and the values of the Constitution. It's built upon virtues and values that accord respect and kindness and thoughtfulness. And it never was intended to be a system of government that simply looked to make everybody richer. And it was more focused on making lives richer. And those pains, I think, are starting to touch every place. Take a look at Medicaid and SNAP recipients, the healthcare system, over and over, even our cattle ranchers in Montana who have suffered through difficulties with, price points that they can endure. Now, to cover that, of course, they find out that he's importing beef from other places, which only downgrades the cost of their beef and their production costs and their issues that they're confronted with drought and all kinds of other circumstances that make it difficult. So even our strong typically conservative members of society are seeing what it is that can develop when you have this kind of governance. And so I honestly believe that the screw is turning, as I mentioned before, but we can't let up. But it's everywhere. If you take a look at education, the downgrade of student loans that allow for us to produce healthcare professionals no longer available and utilized in order to take care of our healthcare system, the health insurance issues that are impacting people every place. My daughter is going to pay triple for her insurance what she did before. So this pain gradually emerging from 1,000 different centers of interest and energy is starting to manifest in ways that touch virtually every American. And as a consequence of that, even those titans of industry who have been hiding in the shadows in acquiescence because of their bottom line, and they're concerned about whether the stock market rises or falls as their primary area of concern, they too are parents. They too are people that are subjected to vengeance, just literally absolute vengeance. And now what they see happening with things like Greenland, you wrote very prosaically about Greenland and what is happening with that particular issue. And I was struck the other evening. In fact, I was surprised that it went this far, even though I know that Donald Trump has no character, or no virtues, no ethics of any kind whatsoever to guide his insights and his actions. I was still struck at the audacity of trying to suggest that you're going to attack another NATO country, thereby decimating that particular alliance and pitting us one against the other in a way that allows apparently what he believes for the pieces to be picked up ultimately by his realm, his regime, his form of government that he perceives to be correct. See, I don't even think he has plans sometimes. You would know better than I, Miles. I was involved with administrations before. You were right on the inside of that cabal, and you know what he does on a daily basis. My guess is he doesn't sleep. He's constantly concerned about vengeance and adoration. And I mean, the notion that you go around putting your name on virtually everything from our money to the Kennedy Center and the desecration of values that takes place with that is hard to believe that he has remained viable in this atmosphere. And I think it was allowed to be done because he appealed to some of those small sides of our humanity, the vengeance, the resentment, the lack of having traditional economies that produce less wealth differential between people. All of those things, they let occupy them for a while. But now we're on the brink of everything from the 25th Amendment being needed and necessary, because I think this guy is spinning out of control. And as a consequence of that, that question is going to become relevant at some near point in time. He looks at NATO and he calls them a paper tiger and talks about them being virtually nothing. He sees them as able to be run over with a steamroller. And he looks at Vladimir Putin and calls him a genius and smart. And, I don't know what agreements those two could have, but I can't imagine it would be much that was in common. But nonetheless, he sings the praises. His highest amount of adoration goes to Vladimir Putin. No other leader on the planet has said that about Vladimir Putin. So I sometimes think about the saying that I think it was J.M. Smith that said, if you dance with the devil, then you haven't got a clue. For you think you're going to change the devil, but the devil changes you. And at the end of the day, I think that's what's going to happen with Wall Street and the Federal Reserve, is they finally are going to move away from the devil because it's consuming them at the same pace that it is him.
Well, Governor, I could not have put it better. And I want to just say, before we let you go, you are not just personally putting country before party. You have been a part of a wider effort to make sure more Republicans have air cover to push back against this guy and to push back against the hijacking of the conservative movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and where can people find your organization?
Well, we've gotten more aggressive over time, I think. The bottom line is this is an idea that was the given birth by John Danforth, Senator Danforth, Senator Alan Simpson, God rest his soul. And as a consequence, they wanted to, as the gentlemen that they are, as the people who were focused upon their country first and their politics second, wanted to create an entity that would allow for us to focus upon those kinds of issues, the principles of republicanism that were admired, and the confidence that was invested in them revealed that, and that we were able to, as Republicans, get engaged in government in a way that, even though there may be difference of opinion, there at the end of the day was civility and the capacity to work across the aisle. And so I have been involved with that group. It's called Our Republican Legacy, and it's focused primarily upon respect for the Constitution and to live by the words and the promises of the Constitution, and also by the rule of law, recognizing that if we want to move away from those two pyramids, then we're going to end up at the end of the day returning back to the law of the jungle. And everyone thought that was rather extreme in the beginning, but as time has unfolded, it has proven, I think, to a vast majority of the American people that we're on the cusp. We're at the precipice of danger, and this is an existential moment. And frankly, it's amazing to me how Benjamin Franklin warned us when he said, "You have a republic, but only if you can keep it."
Well, Governor Marc Racicot, former Republican governor of Montana, we are so grateful for your insights and for your leadership, and we hope you will join us again, sir.
Well, I'll tell you this, Miles. I am incredibly grateful for you and Xander, because you're putting, I'm just an old duffer, and I don't have all that long left in front of me. You two do, and those of your compatriots do. And so for your courage and your absolute refusal to be exhausted by what otherwise would be an exhausting process is subject of my great gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll have you back again soon. Well, look, folks, in other news, in keeping with the optimism that the governor expressed, Donald Trump is about to have it potentially handed to him again on a different but related issue. Now, one of those things that I said I warned Wall Street executives about before the 2024 election was tariffs. Now, Donald Trump came into office and he did exactly what I warned. He imposed tariffs. It led to prices skyrocketing. But there may be a reprieve coming up very soon. The Supreme Court is reviewing whether Donald Trump illegally imposed those tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a national security law he used to justify many of them. Now, lower courts have ruled that those tariffs were indeed illegal, and a decision from Supreme Court justices could come as soon as this week. Now, here's the thing. If the court sides against Donald Trump, the government could be required to refund billions and billions of dollars collected from those tariffs. Now, just bear with me 1 second. Let's re-baseline for anyone who is not following along. Tariffs are a fancy word for taxes. Donald Trump came into office and slapped new taxes on a wide swatch of goods from all over the world, things that you buy in stores every single day. What happened? Exactly what you would expect to happen. Prices skyrocketed, in some cases dramatically. And then Donald Trump lowered some of them on things like coffee and beef because there was mass public outcry. And then the Supreme Court took up the case of whether it was even legal in the first place for Donald Trump to slap these taxes on goods on your store shelves, since only Congress has the power under the Constitution to levy taxes. Now, when those arguments happened a few months ago in front of the Supreme Court, most legal observers who were watching said that the justices were at best deeply skeptical of the administration's arguments. And a lot of them felt like the Supreme Court was poised to rule against Donald Trump. Now, the president knows this. That is why he posted a long rant on Truth Social earlier today, seemingly realizing that the sheer shit show ahead of him, if the Supreme Court rules the tariffs illegal, could be presidency wrecking. He wrote this, quote, "If the Supreme Court rules against the United States of America on this national security bonanza, all caps, we're screwed." Correction, Donald. We are not screwed. You are screwed because you have meddled in the American economy in a way that has put working Americans at risk, that has put working Americans in a position that they're leaving the grocery store with their shopping carts half as full as they would have for their families because of what you have done in the American economy. Now, here's the real kicker today, folks. The real kicker is there is someone very close to the Trump administration who is already betting against Donald Trump. Interestingly, the sons of Howard Lutnick, who is Donald Trump's commerce secretary, are running their father's investment firm and betting on the Supreme Court ruling that tariffs are illegal. As Wired reported back in July 2025, Cantor Fitzgerald's investment banking arm explored and then executed deals tied to the potential that the tariffs would get struck down and that there would be refunds if Trump's tariffs were struck down by the high court. Now, the firm offered companies 20 to 30% upfront of what they had been paid in tariffs in exchange for the rights to future refunds. That's how confident they were that ultimately the judicial system would find that this was illegal. Internal correspondence reviewed by Wired said Cantor completed at least one deal worth about $10 million. Now, that was quite a while ago. There's probably more since then. And the firm told clients it had capacity to scale up those deals to the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, these refunds are linked to lawsuits arguing Trump exceeded his authority under that law he used to invoke the tariffs. And lawmakers flagged conflict of interest concerns because Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick ran Cantor Fitzgerald for decades and remains a leading tariff advocate. I want to bring Xander back into the conversation here. Xander, this is another thing that amidst a sea of bad news gives me optimism, is once again, the courts are fighting back. The courts are fighting back in a way that gave Jerome Powell the courage to go punch back against the Trump administration because he's confident he'll prevail against these bogus potential criminal charges. And now on this signature economic issue that Donald Trump put in place that's been kicking the butts of average Americans, it looks like the high court, as soon as this Wednesday, might overturn that policy. What do you think?
Yeah, it is nice to see our institutions stepping up and behaving as you would hope they would at times. It hasn't been quite the defense of our Constitution that I was hoping it would be this entire time. The frustrating thing is the delay from Trump imposing his will and our institutions being able to curb him. You'd hope, in the future, we do something to reduce that time in between an unlawful president doing unconstitutional things and our system's ability to check them. It's a new issue. I understand why we don't have that in place yet. We haven't had to have that in place quite in the same way, but it is nice finally seeing the courts step up in the ways they have, especially in the last couple months here.
Well, look, and if this happens, it will be a huge repudiation of the administration's lies, and people are going to see that at the grocery store. I mean, the Trump administration again and again repeatedly has created this very provably false story that tariffs don't make prices go up. What's so crazy about that is as the public started to panic about coffee prices and beef prices, how did the administration respond? They said, well, we'll just lower the tariffs. Oh, so you are admitting the tariffs are effing taxes that are making goods more expensive. My gosh. But people believe what the White House says. And so if the court strikes them down, I mean, I think folks are going to see relief, maybe not immediately, but eventually relief at the grocery. And that again shows the lie. But here's the crazy thing is that's just one way that the Trump administration has figured out how to levy tariffs. It doesn't completely give us relief across the board, but this whole thing, his whole approach to the economy, boil it down to its essence. It smacks of authoritarian rule. This is what you call a command economy. When one person takes command over economic decisions. I mean, just this past week, Donald Trump was bullying credit card companies and saying he was going to set interest rates, telling them what to set their interest rates at for 2026. I mean, he's literally trying to say, here's how much your credit card interest rate's going to be. Here's how much I want your mortgages to be. Here's what I want the price of goods to be at the grocery store. Here's the people I want to run the companies that make the goods that you get at the grocery store. Here's what countries I'm going to allow you to buy goods from. He's literally making our economic decisions for us and creating catastrophe for Americans. But we have seen this story before, because this is what dictators do.
Right. I actually had a conversation with a Wall Street titan this morning, someone who's one of the greatest traders in Wall Street history. And I asked him what he thought about all this action. He was shook, largely because what you talked about. He mentioned, obviously, what's happening with Jerome Powell, but he also talked about the credit card cap rates. He talked about the interest rates on mortgages that Trump wants to control. And he's like, once you untether this from smart economists that are doing their best to figure out how to make sure the economy doesn't get overheated, and you put it at the whims of a dictator, things can quickly go sour. And there's, to your point, no shortage of historical analogies to this moment. The other thing he said, though, which was really interesting, is he said, you know what, this is the first time since we've been working together, and this is a guy who's been a donor of mine through several different initiatives, that I am worried about the elections. And I think the governor was pointing to something half correct when he was on, and he was saying the coalition is building and expanding. I think a lot of people are seeing they're not immune to being vulnerable from this administration. And as he goes from sector to sector to sector, there's a lot of people that thought they could do a handshake deal with the devil. And I think in general, folks can, but what they can't do is do a handshake deal with an inconsistent and disloyal devil. I think you saw that with Exxon. They said, great, you're saying you're going to protect us in Venezuela. We can't go down there. And I'm not saying I'm pro, obviously, pumping oil from Venezuela, but you're seeing that these different blocks of leaders are realizing the guy is too inconsistent and too disloyal to even do deals with. And if he's long-term going to do these crazy things that are proven to overheat and drive economies into the ground, it's not worth it. whatever handshake deal you thought you were getting out of this, it's not worth it. It's time to abandon ship. And so I'm hearing that from different leaders in different sectors. And that pace in that narrative is starting to spread faster.
Well, look, I would almost say that, Xander, there's like what I would call the stages of defiance. And stage one is the realization that you can't hide. Yes. You can't hide from the bad things that are happening, because even if this wannabe dictator doesn't target you, him targeting other people directly affects your rights. But that's stage one, is realizing you can't hide. Stage two, or maybe it's stage three, is realizing you don't have to hide, because there are other people of conscience out there who want to protect the rule of law. There are people out there who will be a part of that tribe of the tribeless with you. If you stand up, you won't be alone. You will have folks with you fighting back. And more people are getting to stage 2 and 3 in those stages of defiance and realizing, they don't just have to hide. They don't just have to take it. And I think another example of that is our third and final story today. And briefly, we will just touch on developments in Minnesota. Now, here's the incredible thing that happened, folks. Minnesota, along with the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, decided to do exactly that today. Not to hide, not to stand in the background as the Trump administration persecutes the people of Minnesota, executes people in Minnesota, but to fight back. And they are suing the Trump administration over the recent surge of ICE agents in the Twin Cities. Now, this lawsuit argues the deployment of more than 2,100 federal immigration officers is fundamentally unconstitutional, and they are asking a federal judge to halt the operation. Attorney General of Minnesota Keith Ellison, who many of you have seen out there on television, announced the lawsuit and cited that fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good and accused federal authorities of excessive use of force, warrantless arrests, and violating state sovereignty. Xander, these are all fundamental things that go to the core of our constitutional system of government. And I think that's what's leading more and more people to come out of hiding, is these aren't complex nuances that the administration is trying to find loopholes to go after people. They are violating those fundamental guardrails that protect our democracy, that protect states, that protect individual citizens against warrantless arrest or murder. You're on mute. I know. We will never make it through a full episode.
Where are we at? 250? I almost got through it. All right.
If you're just tuning in for the first time to Defiance Daily, you'll find out soon that Xander's got a mute problem.
It's good content, I heard. I think we're lucky that out of all the attempts at authoritarianism, we are dealing with a phenomenally stupid group of people that, to your point, are doing the most straightforward, embarrassing version of this with almost the slickness of my toddler running around the house. So that is probably speeding up the growth of the Defiance, because their unconstitutional acts are not hidden. They're not cloaked. They're so straightforward. They're gaslighting us on videos we watch. And let's hope they keep stumbling. Trump has certainly built an administration filled with loyalists instead of experts and specialists. And so they are set up to fail on that front. We just got to keep organizing. And as people see this clearly, I like your steps of the Defiance. Step one, you can't hide. Step two, you should probably fight. Those are becoming more and more clear.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. Well, look, that also leads us, Xander, to our final segment that we do every single day, which is who is joining the Defiance. And honestly, when we do this segment, when we work with our producer, Mercedes, who is outstanding, there are a zillion ideas every day. That wouldn't have been the case months ago, but there are more and more and more examples of people pushing back against the abuses of power, people pushing back against the constitutional violations. And the one that we decided to highlight today is a district attorney who's not even in Minnesota, but who saw what was happening and said, no, we're not going to let that happen here. And that was the district attorney in the city of Philadelphia who spoke out after the murder of Renee Nicole Good in Minnesota. Take a look at what he had to say.
If any law enforcement agent, any ICE agent, is going to come to Philly to commit crimes, then you can get the F out of here. Because if you do that here, I will charge you with those crimes. You will be arrested. You will stand trial. You will be convicted, whether it's in state or federal court. It's my office prosecuting it. That's how the law works. And you will do your time, because Donald Trump cannot pardon you for a state court conviction. Do you hear me, ICE agents? Do you hear me, National Guard? Do you hear me, military? You're going to jail if you commit crimes in the city of Philadelphia. You will be accountable. The law applies to all of you. And I know that there are honest, decent, moral law enforcement officers out there by the bushel, including in ICE. This is not for you. This is for any one of your colleagues who thinks they are above the law.
Ooh, boy. I thought that was really a powerful one, Xander. You got to think that after his comments, DAs across the country are saying, yeah, wait a second. Why are we literally allowing masked federal agents to come in and break the law? We're not talking about them doing their jobs. We're not talking about states going against the federal government when the federal government has a right to go enforce federal law. We are talking about absolutely naked lawlessness that keeps happening. How do we know it's happening? Because every time I open up my phone, I see video with my eyes of ICE agents who I used to oversee breaking the law, threatening American citizens, trying to get into their homes and vehicles. It is so obvious. And now you've got district attorneys saying, wait a second, we are the prosecutors here. This is not going to stand. I thought that was outstanding.
Larry Krasner's the man. He's been the man for a while. He probably has a hard time walking around with those set of balls that he's got, dude. He's the man. And he's in criminal justice reform. We've modeled a lot of the prosecutors that we support after him. He was very early in the prosecutorial reform movement, and we tried to support a lot of elections that support folks like him. I talked to 2 DAs this morning, former DAs, about if we should be asking our DAs throughout the country to take this nationwide, take this stance nationwide. And so let me just share a little bit about what I learned. They said there's basically 3 steps to prosecuting a federal employee. Step 1 is gathering the evidence. And they said that that is tremendously hard if the FBI or other federal groups will not kind of play nice and cooperate, as is the case with the Renee Good murder. And in the case of like masked officers, it can be really, really challenging. In the Minnesota killing, we still don't know who was with the officer. We have identified the officer that killed her, but we don't know who was with him. And we had lots of video of that case. So gathering evidence can be challenging. I'm just speaking to like the uphill battle that they're facing. Getting the indictment depends how much evidence is out there. Again, the evidence is hard. Then they have to get the indictment. And then the last step, which is really challenging, is making sure the case does not get moved to federal court. It is often going to get moved to federal court. That's the most challenging piece of it. But there are things they can do. Let me take a step back, actually. Usually when prosecutors are looking at that degree of challenge and having a successful prosecution, they usually drop the case because that, and they pivot to letting the federal government prosecute the case. In this case, though, we cannot do that. We cannot do that. We cannot rely on the federal government to drive these prosecutions, and we need these prosecutors to try these to bring these bring these indictments, irregardless, because we need to start probing where their defenses lie, where they are weak, where they are vulnerable. The DAs I talked to had some ideas. They said, basically, if you charge this officer just with a murder, there's the equivalent charge at the federal level. But if you charge them with something else, some other thing that's state specific, and there's not an equivalent charge at the federal level, you still might be able to try them at the state level. And we need data on what works in trying these folks. So we should be pressing the DAs to go outside of the norm and not just judge, can you win the case? Can you not? Will it be a waste of money because you can't get a conviction, et cetera? You need to try them to just start getting data points on how we could possibly hold these folks accountable, what works and what doesn't. And then secondly, he talked about just the power of dissuasion, just the power of showing ICE officers that, hey, even if maybe the federal government will save me and I will be immune in this case, I don't want to be, Miles, you actually lived through this. You had your face out front and you were on trial from one side, not on trial yet, but you were on trial in the sense that you got blasted everywhere and attacked. It's not fun. And if these guys go from thinking this is a fun adventure I'm on where I get to break laws and target people I don't like, et cetera, to, there's the possibility that I get dragged in front of a judge, that my family gets all this stress and pressure, you might be able to dissuade a lot of these folks from signing up. And we need to limit the ability for the federal government to recruit the worst of the worst into this.
Well, let's take a couple of member questions in the time that we have got left here, Xander. And if you are a member of defiance.org, feel free to submit your questions over there in the chat on Substack. We've got one of them here from All Look for America says, why is it you two think any actual law enforcement against Trump will happen? Well, I'll tell you why I think it's going to happen. One, Donald Trump won't live forever. But two, most importantly, he will not be in power forever. As much as he tries, we all, you, us, will not let him. And guess what? There's not a statute of limitations on a lot of the laws Donald Trump is breaking. There's not a statute of limitations on him violating constitutional rights. Let's just take Jerome Powell as an example. If this administration is launching a criminal investigation into Jerome Powell, and it's not actually about taxpayer spending on the renovations of the Fed building, if it actually is about the obvious thing that all of us can see happening, which is to coerce the Fed chair to do what the president wants, well, guess what? That very act of creating a federal investigation under a false pretext, that's unconstitutional. That's illegal. That can get people sent to jail. And I would say right now, The people working on that investigation, they should be worried. The people who are working on these other obvious revenge investigations into people like James Comey and Letitia James should be worried. The people who are carrying out Trump administration policies to tell ICE agents that they have absolute immunity and that they have total authorization to use, quote, whatever means necessary to oppress protesters, they should be looking over their shoulder. They should be worried because these folks can get prosecuted on the back end. Now, you might say, well, look, Donald Trump's going to pardon everyone. Well, you heard Larry Krasner say it there. He can't pardon everyone for everything. He can't pardon people for state crimes. And believe me, across these policies that the administration has carried out, they're not carrying them out in the Bahamas, folks. They're doing them in U.S. states. There is going to be the opportunity for accountability on the back end of this. And I'll say, Xander, this makes me think we should have our good friend Glenn Kirshner back sometime soon, because Glenn and I had a private conversation the other night about exactly this. Not about doing what the Trump team is doing when the opposition comes back into power, not engaging in revenge investigations against the other side, but making sure there is clear accountability for clear lawbreaking, and there will be that opportunity.
Yeah, we'll have Larry Krasner on the program too. So
we should have Larry on. Yeah. Let's put the bat signal up. Larry, come on Defiance Daily. We're going to have you here. Xander, I'm going to throw you one of these other questions here, which is Kimmy Wynn asks, question, could the Project 2025 manifesto be used to prove motive of criminality someday? Xander, put your lawyer hat on. We all know you secretly got your law degree. What say ye?
I'm going to throw it back to you on that one. I did want to make a final point about Krasner, though, and the prosecution of these ICE agents and other folks that need to be held accountable. We are building a new muscle, right? We did not have to have the state stand up to the federal government the way it has to stand up to the federal government now. Krasner, unsurprisingly, is leading the charge. But we need to push all of our DAs, all of our AGs to do the same, to follow suit. When I asked the former DAs that I was chatting with this morning, what's the barrier to this? They said one is accepting more losses than usual. It's loss tolerance because you're going to lose more often than you're used to. Two is bravery. A lot of these folks just don't want to be targeted. A lot of these people came into prosecution work not because they were social justice warriors. That's usually on the defense side, and so they just don't want to. They want to have a successful political career. They want to put their head down and avoid this. We can't let that happen. Honestly, Miles, I have like a real fear, and maybe you can riff on this. I know then we can go to our other question. I have a real fear that if we do not see our local and state governments doing something, just show us something, that we are going to start relying on unofficial citizen groups to defend each other. And that is not a road we want to go down. State and local officials have democratic authority. They have constitutional precedents. They have they have a narrative that allows them to support us. But in lieu of those folks doing something, we are going to get citizens defending each other. They will be called domestic terrorist groups. They don't have the same sort of democratic authority to do what they're doing. And I think that's a road to hell if we start having citizens fight with ICE agents.
That's why we have the rule of law in America, because we don't want either extreme. We don't want the rule of a tyrant and a single individual who's making all of these decisions for us. And we don't want mob rule. We don't want people in the streets and militias making those decisions. And this all sounds very intense, but that is what's at stake here. Now, again, Xander, what gives me heart is that people are making that very clear. They don't want to end up in either scenario. They would very much like to go back to the rule of law. And every time we get a judicial decision against this administration, I think we get a little bit closer to that happening. I mean, I'm going to be watching closely to see if the Supreme Court's decision on tariffs comes down on Wednesday, because that'll be a big rebuke. But there are others to come. Now, I know that we're out of time here, but I will just say this for folks. I urge you to join us this Wednesday. If you haven't before, if you haven't joined us in the past, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we do Defiance Daily, but every Wednesday night is a special night. It's our weekly mission brief where we, as a club, take a real action to push back against these abuses of power. You may be reading the news every day and think, this is hopeless, we can't do anything. Actually, we can. And we've got thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people now a part of Defiance who want to do something. And so this week, we'll have some exciting announcements to make about another great way that we are fighting back against these abuses of power and real things that people can do. So I urge you to join us on Wednesday. Also, if you want to know more about the Jerome Powell situation and why we think that this is significant, go take a look at our article from today on our website, defiance.news. That's www.defiance.news. And please do follow us on social media platforms. Go to our main website, defiance.org, to take a look and consider joining the Club for Courageous Americans. We need more people in the fight. Xander, any parting words?
I think you said it perfectly. Join the club. Like this is, I saw in some of the Q&A I had with the Defiance members in our chat on Substack, people are looking for ways to get involved. And there is so much muzzle velocity happening right now. It's hard to know where to stand and what to do. We started this organization to answer that question. If we are not living up to it, also let us know. This is Pliable. We are here to build this thing so it answers that question. It's a dynamic moment. We need dynamic infrastructure. We're here to be that. And so if you haven't yet, please join the club and join this fight with us. Numbers matter in this thing.
Well, and one last thing. I saw a Defiance.org member, Kenneth Gilbert, mention in the chat that something special might be happening on February 24th. That's when the president delivers his State of the Union address. Stay tuned, folks. Defiance.org will be sponsoring the biggest rebuttal to the State of the Union out there. More on that soon. In the meantime, folks, join us again tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Defiance Daily. Until then, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. Thank you for joining.